Hello, Man in Gray here with another Man in Gray book review. And today's book is a gigantic one. It's one of the longest books that I've ever read. It's called Reclaiming History, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy by Vincent Bugliosi, which was published in 2007 by W. W. Norton. It's 1,612 pages long, and it weighs something like 7 or 8 pounds. It's a huge hardcover book. And in addition, there's a CD that comes with the book that includes about 3,000 pages of footnotes. And to be totally open here, I've read the book, but I didn't plow through the 3,000 pages of footnotes. There's no question that the most investigated crime in American history was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. The initial investigation was conducted by the Dallas Police Department with assistance from the FBI and the Secret Service, who were both in town because Kennedy was driving on a motorcade to give a speech in Dallas that afternoon. The man who was arrested initially was a young guy from Dallas named Lee Harvey Oswald. He was arrested initially not for killing Kennedy, but for shooting a Dallas police officer named J.D. Tippit. But after Oswald was taken into custody, the evidence began to pile up that he was also the man who shot Kennedy. Oswald denied having anything to do with Kennedy's murder or Tippit's murder, even though there were multiple witnesses who saw him shoot Tippit. He even denied owning a rifle, even though the Dallas police, in searching his apartment, found a photograph of Oswald holding the rifle and the pistol that he used to kill Tippit with. We learned later that Oswald's wife took that photograph, but Oswald still denied that he owned a rifle. Shortly after, a few days after his arrest, Oswald was himself killed by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner. Ironically, while Oswald was being transferred from the jail he had been staying in to what was believed to be a more safe, secure location. Ruby had gone to downtown Dallas to a Western Union office to wire money to one of his strippers who was about to be kicked out of her apartment for not paying rent. And then after he did that, he noticed there were a bunch of TV cameras and media cars at the police station. So he walked down there to see what was going on, and he was able to slip through the basement. And then as Oswald was being carried out to get in a police car, Ruby stepped forward, pulled out a pistol that he had with him, and shot Oswald. Now, it's the killing of Oswald shortly after his arrest that led to a lot of people believing that there was a conspiracy that Ruby had killed Oswald to keep him from telling what was going on. And so to try to clear up everything, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, appointed a commission of bipartisan Democrat and Republican commission to investigate the killing. The commission was led by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren, who alternated his job as the Supreme Court justice with his job as investigating this killing. And so it was known as the Warren Commission. Other members of the commission included the House Minority Leader, Gerald Ford, who later became President of the United States, and Hale Boggs, a Democratic congressman who was very prominent at the time, and then also John Dulles, who was the head of the CIA. So these were all well-known, prominent politicians and government officials. They spent about a year investigating the crime, and they published a report that was almost 900 pages long, and then they released all of the documents that they had gathered in, I think, 6 or 7 volumes. It was about 16,000 pages of material altogether. And most people at the time accepted the Warren Commission's report, including the Kennedy family, but there was a small but vocal minority of people who said that either the Warren Commission had missed the truth, that they'd rushed to judgment, they'd been in too big of a hurry to come to a conclusion, or that they were part of a giant conspiracy, that the Warren Commission people were actually trying to cover up what really happened. And over time, these conspiracy theorists began to take hold of the American populace, and eventually the majority of Americans began to accept that there was a conspiracy somehow to kill Kennedy, and they rejected the Warren Commission report. In the mid 1970s, the House of Representatives in Washington decided to reopen the case. They started their own investigation, and they, in particular, were interested in an audio tape that supposedly was recorded at the crime scene, at the scene of the assassination, and supposedly recorded gunshots, multiple gunshots. And based on this rather questionable evidence, the House committee ruled or concluded the opposite conclusion of the Warren Commission. The House committee concluded that there was a conspiracy, but they didn't know who the conspirators were. And then after that, there were a number of private investigations, and one of the most interesting one occurred in the mid 1980s when a British television company decided to make a documentary where they would put Oswald on trial. They wanted to stage, in other words, a mock trial of Oswald. And they went to great lengths to do this. They built a studio in London that resembled the Dallas courthouse, Dallas courtroom. And then they flew in actual witnesses from Dallas, witnesses to the crime, and they flew in people who investigated the crime, police officers, FBI agents, and so forth. And to lead up the prosecution of Oswald, they hired Vincent Bugliosi, who was a prosecutor from Los Angeles who became famous for putting Charles Manson and his followers on trial for the Sharon Tate murders in the late 1960s. Bugliosi's book about the Sharon Tate murders, the Charles Manson killings, was named Helter Skelter, and it was the biggest, and still is, the biggest selling true crime book ever published. To defend Oswald in this mock trial, the producers turned to a flamboyant and prominent criminal defense attorney named Gary Spence, who liked to wear buckskin and Panama hats. Spence became very familiar to American audiences on television in the 1990s when he frequently appeared on TV during the O.J. Simpson murder trial as a commentator. So Bugliosi, even though this was a mock trial, Bugliosi took his role as prosecutor very seriously, and he did a huge amount of research. He read all 16,000 pages of the Warren Commission documents in addition to the Warren Commission report. And then he conducted independent interviews with all these people and had witnessed the crime in Dallas and who had been flown in to do this show. He also interviewed a number of conspiracy theorists to find out what they believed and how they came to their conclusions and so forth. So he did a huge amount of research. In fact, by the time he got through, he had like 2 filing cabinets full of documents. And then after the show wrapped up, after they'd finished their mock trial and finished filming the show, Bugliosi decided to take all this massive data and turn it into a book, this huge book, which he spent on and off 18 years writing. And to me, the most incredible thing is he wrote this book, this huge 1,600-page book, in longhand on hundreds of yellow legal pads. And then his poor secretary had to type this massive text up, in TypeScript, including the 3,000 pages of footnotes. So, I can only feel for a secretary who had to have that job. Here's several hundred, pads of notebook paper, and you have to type all that up. So it was an incredible thing. Any case, tell you a little bit about the book now. That was kind of a big background here. The opening chapter is the most important chapter of Reclaiming History. It's a 300-page timeline of everything that happened from the morning of Friday, November 22nd, when Kennedy woke up in a hotel room in Fort Worth, until 4 days later when he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. This timeline goes into extreme detail. It traces the movements of Kennedy, Oswald, Jack Ruby, and various witnesses. And so that's the essential part of the book, is that timeline, because it really, in a very clear way, lays out all the events that happened, as far as we can tell, all drawing on multiple sources. After that, the second chapter is a 66-page study of the Warren Commission, how it was formed, how they did their work, and what their conclusions were, what they got right, and the mistakes that they made, and some of the information that they weren't told. For example, the Warren Commission wasn't told that Oswald well, there was a debate over. There was a question over whether Oswald's wife was Russian, and there was a question whether she had legal status in the United States. And so an FBI agent went and questioned her while Oswald was gone at work. And when Oswald got back and found that an FBI agent had come to his house and questioned his wife, he flew into a rage, and he went to the FBI office in Dallas. But the agent who had questioned him wasn't there, and so he wrote a letter threatening him and left it behind. And then after the assassination, the FBI director Hoover had that letter destroyed and covered up the fact that it had been that he had left it there because it made the FBI look bad that they hadn't followed up on Oswald after he threatened an agent. And so the Warren Commission didn't know everything. That was one of the things that came out decades later. So it goes into that, and then there's an almost 300 page, about 270 page biography of Oswald, which is probably the second most important chapter in the book. This biography of Oswald, which could be a book on its own, goes through his entire life story from his very troubled, dysfunctional family as a child, his mental instabilities. One of the things I learned from this book is that Oswald was probably dyslexic. The examples we have of his handwriting have the same kind of spelling errors that you see in dyslexic, spelling errors that a third or fourth grader would catch. And yet he was able to teach himself basically to read despite his dyslexia. He was an avid reader, mostly of left-wing political books and tracts. And it follows Oswald's attempt to make a life for himself in the Marine Corps, and then his decision to defect to the Soviet Union, his suicide attempt while in Russia, his return to the United States, his settling in New Orleans for a while, and then moving back to Dallas, and then finally the assassination and his murder a few days later. So it covers basically all we know about Oswald's life. And then after that, there are shorter chapters on Kennedy's autopsy, the doctors who worked on him trying to save his life in Dallas, and then the autopsy that was done in Washington, D.C. There's a chapter on the famous film of the assassination taken by Abraham Zapruder, and whether the film was doctored or not, goes into all that. And it talks about the rifle and the pistol that Oswald owned. And then finally, there's a summary of the evidence against Oswald. And then in part 2 of the book, which is the longest section, it goes into all the conspiracy theories, or the major conspiracy theories in the Kennedy assassination. It goes into how this all got started, who the first people were to question the Warren Commission, and what their motives were in making out these conspiracy theories. And then there's a whole series of chapters about each of the major conspiracy theories. There's one on the mafia, the CIA, the FBI, on Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, on Fidel Castro and the Cubans, the KGB, and various right-wing groups. And he even talks about the Oliver Stone movie, the JFK movie that Oliver Stone made, and the prosecution by Jim Garrison of Clay Shaw. Garrison was a district attorney in New Orleans who blamed Shaw for the assassination and actually put him on trial, and that was the basis of the movie. And then he basically knocks down all these conspiracy theories. Now, there are a whole bunch of conspiracy theories about the Kennedy assassination, but they basically fall into 2 categories. One category says that Oswald was a shooter, or one of the shooters, but he was part of the conspiracy. He was basically a hired hitman. And in this book, Bugliosi shows why that doesn't seem likely. For one thing, Oswald was, of course, mentally unbalanced and violent and impulsive, not the kind of person you would hire to kill somebody. The KGB officer interrogated Oswald when Oswald defected to the Soviet Union, and in a report that was released after the fall of the Soviet Union, this KGB officer said that Oswald was far too unstable and mentally unbalanced to be of use for them, either as a spy or as a propaganda tool. So they basically just left him alone. They did wiretap his apartment to keep tabs on him, but they considered him too unstable to be of any use. And of course, it's hard to imagine somebody hiring some nut like Oswald to be the killer. And then there's those other issues. If Oswald was a hired gunman, why did he only have about $200 in total assets? He was living in a rooming house in basically a converted converted closet. He was living in a closet basically at the time of the assassination. He didn't know how to drive, but he was taking driving lessons up until just a few days before the assassination. And we know from multiple witnesses that the night before the assassination, Oswald met with his estranged wife and tried to talk her into rejoining him, going back to living with him again. Why would he have done that if he was planning on killing the president the very next day? So it doesn't seem to fit. And of course, after the assassination, instead of fleeing, instead of getting on a bus and getting out of town or going to the airport, Oswald went back to his apartment, picked up a pistol, and then wandered around on foot in the neighborhood until he got caught. That doesn't seem like the actions of a professional assassin. And of course, the assassination weapon, this rifle that Oswald had, was a 20-year-old Italian Army surplus rifle with a bolt action and a bent telescopic sight that Oswald had bought cheaply through the mail. And the pistol that he bought was also a cheap old pistol that he got for mail order. So none of that seems to fit the pattern of a professional hitman or a conspirator. Now, the second conspiracy theory is that Oswald was completely innocent, that he was a fall guy, a scapegoat, or a patsy. Other people killed him, and they blamed Oswald for the killing. Of course, one question would be, well, why would you pick an obscure person like Oswald to be the fall guy? People that knew Oswald before the time said that he never spoke out against Kennedy. He never had public beef with Kennedy, and that's one of the big mysteries is why did he pick Kennedy to kill? Maybe he may have killed him simply because he was driving by the building he was at. But why would you pick Kennedy? Why would you pick Oswald to be a fall guy? A second problem with this theory is that Oswald's behavior certainly wasn't the behavior of an innocent patsy. We know that 9 months before the Kennedy assassination, he tried to kill somebody else, a retired general named Edwin Walker, who was a right-wing member of the John Birch Society, and someone that Oswald had expressed hatred for. And we know from his widow that Oswald's widow that he had shot at Walker and just barely missed killing him. The bullet hit a window frame, and the bullet deflected just a few inches and missed him. So that doesn't sound like an innocent patsy. And then, of course, he was the only person in the Texas School Book Depository building to flee after the assassination. Why would he have done that if he was innocent? When he caught a taxi back to his home, he had the taxi cab stop several blocks away from his house, and then he walked home so that the cab driver wouldn't see where his location was. That doesn't sound like somebody who was innocent. And, of course, we have multiple witnesses who saw Oswald shoot and kill Officer Tippit when Tippit stopped him because he fit the description of the guy who, if Oswald had fled when Oswald fled the depository building, a description was put out of him. And Tippit probably pulled him over because he fit the description, and he shot him. And then when Oswald fled into the movie theater, the Texas theater where he was captured, he pulled out his gun and tried to shoot the policemen who were trying to arrest him. They overpowered him. And as they were taking him into custody, he shouted, "It's all over now." And that, again, doesn't sound like the actions of an innocent patsy. So both these types of conspiracy theories don't really seem to fit the facts. But there's still plenty of people that accept the idea that there was a conspiracy theory. Now, the reason Bugliosi's book is so enormous and why it goes into such incredible detail on a whole bunch of rather esoteric facts is that he wanted to convince people, especially people who were sitting on the fence, that there was no conspiracy, that the Warren Commission was basically correct. He also interviewed, I forgot to mention, he also, along with the other interviews he did, he interviewed Oswald's widow, who initially, and this is interesting, Marina Oswald, who later married a man named Porter, so her name is now Marina Porter. She initially agreed that Oswald was the killer. She said he had to have done it. But in the years later, she changed her tune completely and became a conspiracy theorist and said, her husband didn't have anything to do with it. So when you read the interviews that his widow did early on, she's all saying that Oswald did it, and then later on she says he didn't. So she's one of those people who changed their opinion over time. He also interviewed Oswald's brother, who admitted that Oswald did it and held that belief all the way through his life. So if you're interested in his book, You may be intimidated by the fact that it's such a gigantic book that it's over 1,600 pages long, but there is a solution. If you still want to read this book, but you don't want to plow through such a huge book and lug an 8-pound book around with you, a few years after this book came out, Bugliosi made a abridgment of it, a shortened version of it, which is under a different title. The shortened version is called 4 Days in November, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So the subtitle's the same. 4 Days in November. It's only 665 pages. Still a long book, but about 1,000 pages shorter than this. The abridgment includes the timeline and Oswald's biography and then bits and pieces from the rest of the book. This book, by the way, was also the basis of a movie that came out in 2013 called Parkland, which is the name of the hospital where both Kennedy and Oswald were declared dead. And that movie concentrates on the doctors who tried to save Kennedy's life and the autopsy that was done in Washington, D.C. But that movie was based on this book. So if you don't want to read the book at all, you could watch the movie Parkland because it's based on Bugliosi's book. So you can either read this huge thing, Reclaiming History, or you can read 4 Days in November. They're both basically the same book, 1,000 pages shorter than the other. So the book is Reclaiming History. The author is Vincent Bugliosi. I'm sorry this video was so long, but when you've got a 1,600-page book to go through, you can't do it in just a few minutes. This has been another Man in Great book review. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.